Association in Oxford, Mississippi. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from CoBank, a cooperative bank that has delivered loans, leases, and other financial services to America's electric cooperatives for more than 50 years.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. 2020 is a presidential election year, and if pollster predictions are to be believed, turnout and engagement this cycle could be record-breaking. So what issues are important to voters in electric cooperative territories? And what are co-ops doing to make sure their voices are heard? Today we're talking to Jeffrey Connor, NRECA's Chief Operating Officer, and Keith Frederick, owner of Frederick Polls, a polling and analysis firm based in Virginia. Frederick Polls conducts an annual survey of electric cooperative consumer members, and we'll ask Keith about some of the results of his most recent study. Jeffrey, Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So it's widely accepted that rural voters were a critical, almost deciding factor in the 2016 election. It's kind of shocking that we already have another presidential election coming up this year. Keith, based on the 2019 study that you did for NRECA, focusing on electric co-op members, what are you seeing in terms of trends? What issues are important to rural voters? And what might we see in the coming year in terms of turnout and voting patterns?
Sure. Lots of questions there. First of all, I think engagement. It's pretty clear that the co-op voters are very interested in what's going on. We asked if they're going to vote in the 2020 election, and 96% said yes. And we did not screen them ahead of time if they had voted in the 16 or 18 elections. So that's very high. Nearly universal. Can't get much higher, actually. So you got incredible interest. We also trended a couple of engagement questions that also show that their interest in politics and engagement in politics is going up. We asked a question about whether you've ever contributed to an elected official, and that number went up significantly. We also asked if you've ever contacted a local official to voice your opinion on an issue, and that also went up significantly. I think in terms of what do co-op voters care about, well, it's a lot like what voters all across America care about. They care about the economy. They care about what's going on in their families and their future.
Jeffrey, what do you see as the kind of the prime motivators for co-op voters? You're talking to co-op folks all the time. You're also a very political guy from your previous career. What's your assessment of what's important to them?
Well, I think they're first and foremost focused on community issues, local issues. And as Keith pointed out, there's this phenomenon that Americans will crawl over broken glass to vote in this election. It's going to be a high turnout election, and I've heard it called the electoral storm of the century that's about to descend upon us. But I think in particular, voters who are affiliated with their cooperatives and get information about political engagement through their cooperatives are also really thinking about this election as an expression of their local politics and an opportunity to signal an interest in policy that affects them where they live, where they work, and the co-ops that they're part of back home.
Keith, the 2019 study, one of the things that you focused on was political engagement specifically. I think some of the most surprising advances or findings that you got over the study you did in 2018 came in that section. Talk a little bit about the questions you asked in there and the results you saw.
We asked a question that we trended from 2018 as to whether you have ever contacted an elected official to voice your opinion. And the trend on that went up 15 points. It was 40% said yes in 2018 and 55% said yes in 2019. That tracks a lot of the interest that is being generated on a daily basis nationally with the political scene and I think in state level as well. Politics has become much more intrusive in people's lives. Mm-hmm. Part of that is our president, but part of it is just the general nature of what's going on in the digital world, too, with more explosive number of channels that people are getting information from. The second one we saw was an equally high gap, a 14-point jump in the percentage of people that say they had contributed money to a political candidate or a political cause. And that is directly connected to small donor increases at the national level. And, of course, among co-op voters, too, that's also being facilitated by the digital world. More and more candidates are soliciting voters online to contribute money, and more people are giving small amounts. And it's really good for democracy, because that's happening.
Yeah. And do you see, from where you're sitting, this was not an isolated thing in 2019. You see this kind of continuing through this cycle. They're only going to get more fired up.
Yes, these are indicators of great deal of engagement and interest, yes.
And I just add to that, this is not something that's happening across the board. And I think sometimes it's easy to misinterpret the things that we read and hear as meaning that this effect of politics drawing everyone in really intense ways. It's not universal across the country. There is definitely a segment of the population that is disengaged, and there's been good work around people who are less likely to engage in civic representation. They don't vote as frequently. They aren't getting as much news. They aren't as educated about policy, even extending to outcomes like being less likely to get involved with a charity or donate to a political cause. So our folks are not bystanders. And when you're talking to folks in the co-op service territory, by and large, you're talking to people who are really deeply invested in the politics in their communities.
We started polling co-op members about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. What made us start doing that? Why is that important? And how is it informing kind of the things that we're advancing and advocating?
Well, we started doing this simply to learn more about the people that we wanted to engage as advocates for cooperatives by virtue of the fact that they were involved in the political process themselves, to see how involved are people in the areas where we serve, and are they open-minded when it comes to taking the same messages that we care about as electric cooperatives and making them part of their relationships with elected officials and with the process that we use to elect leaders. And we found, yes, there's a credible open-mindedness that if we have the right tools and create the right conversation with voters, we can have a good baseline conversation with folks about here are the things we believe are most important to the success of the electric cooperative and therefore are also important to the community. And those voters, by and large, pick those ideas up and take them along with them when they go into the voting booth and pull the curtain.
Yeah, and one of the early motivators was the Clean Power Plan that was being proposed by the then administration. And, as members in the co-op, what is being proposed in Washington directly impacts people. And we wanted to check and see what the channels of communication were like and whether people had an interest in what was going on in Washington and wanted to be engaged and involved with it. And what we found was the answer was yes. They really appreciated learning from NRECA and their co-ops what was going on here and learning what impact it would have on their lives. And they wanted to get deeply involved. And it was a great success, the amount of feedback that we got.
That was one of the first steps in an effort that ultimately took 1.2 million comments on the Clean Power Plan from people who were served by an electric cooperative to EPA on the Clean Power Plan. So that was kind of the very beginning, and it's continued to be part of our advocacy and engagement on a political basis ever since.
When we talk about the number that Keith cited earlier, 96% intend to vote, the fact that an engagement we already knew was robust is now fully involved. From a national standpoint, how does that help us do our job? One of the things we're doing is advocating for the co-ops. If we know we have these highly engaged voters that are in their districts, what does that do for us, knowing that that's the number we're working with?
It certainly makes us unique from an advocacy perspective, and we're able to bring these great conversations from back home where elected leaders are seeing someone in the coffee shop and having a conversation about what's going on in the community, and then they're coming to Washington, D.C. to discharge their duties as a member of Congress, and they're hearing about the same issues when they get here. So the strength of those relationships back home, as well as in the Capitol, and the continuity between the conversations in both places really makes us stand apart when you're talking to or thinking about an elected official doing their job for the voters back home.
Yeah. Keith, in the other work that you do, the numbers that you're seeing for the surveys that you do for NRECA, does that bear out, or you're seeing kind of a different level of engagement or a different kind of cross-section?
Well, as Jeffrey said, it does vary in different parts and different communities in America in terms of who's really paying attention to politics right now and really wants to be involved. But generally, at this moment in our history, with President Trump, he has really activated people's interest. I think his direct communication with the voters, the way he does it in an active way and in an engaging way, let's put it that way, it is getting people interested in doing something this time, definitely. But in terms of an advocacy organization or an organization that represents a large part of America, I think that NRECA and the co-ops are fairly unique. I mean, the cooperative structure of having members and owners really does make people more interested and more engaged and more involved. And there aren't too many, other interest groups, let's put it that way, in Washington, D.C. that have that kind of intensity and fervor that's available to this organization.
That brings up another point from the survey you did. One of the sections you looked at was how co-op members, how they see the advocacy work of their co-ops in terms of trying to get them out to vote, trying to get issues in front of them. Some of the numbers you found there were kind of stark advance over what you saw last time. Talk a little bit about what you were asking and what you found.
Well, some of the other questions we asked was, should your co-op encourage members to vote, co-op members to vote? And 75% said yes. That's a big majority. Should they send you email action alerts about breaking legislation or regulatory news that have impacted your co-op and you? And again, about 70% said yes, a big super majority. And then we asked one we've asked before, should your co-op ask you to contact an elected official if there's an issue of interest to the co-ops? And about 60% said yes, and that's a slight increase from before. So they're asking their co-ops to basically educate them and keep them informed.
And Jeffrey, what does that tell us about how the members see their co-ops? Does it kind of validate the idea that they're honest brokers and that they are concerned about their communities not only thriving, but the membership fully participating in our democracy?
Well, certainly. There's no question about that. And it also tells me there's a tremendous amount of pride and local pride in what the electric cooperative is doing to support that community and keep it vibrant, healthy, and strong and represented in our political process.
Let's talk more about what co-ops are doing to get their members engaged. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from CoBank. When it comes to fleet vehicles and utility trucks, office equipment and software, meters, and other infrastructure projects, your upfront costs and ongoing maintenance can get expensive quickly. More and more co-ops are taking advantage of leasing to minimize upfront costs, manage cash flow, and even take advantage of tax credits. You can also gain access to the latest in field and office technology today and decide later if you want to own it or upgrade it, all completely hassle-free. To learn more, email connect@cobank.com or reach out to your relationship manager today.
I'm Patrick Wood from Como Electric Cooperative in Tipton, Missouri. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Jeffrey, what have you heard about the work the co-ops are doing to bring their memberships into the political process, to kind of get them to engage in the fights that are important to the membership?
There are a lot of tools in the Co-ops Vote toolbox. And I think some of the best expressions of that involvement I've seen are the ones that really bring the elected official or candidate to the cooperative for that conversation. And they're occurring with a unity of time and place around what's going on at the co-op and what's important to the people who work there or the people who are served by that co-op. It's a nice thing to be able to talk about cooperatives generally and educate elected officials about what the nature of a co-op is in the first place. That second principle of democratic member participation that's part of how the co-op operates in the public trust is also what compels people who are engaged with the co-op to carry its concerns into the political process with them.
Yeah. You mentioned Co-ops Vote. Give us kind of a high-level view of what that is, what we've done with that program so far, and kind of what we're going to do in the year coming up.
Co-ops Vote started 4 years ago, and it was a national effort to drive voters to the polls, but not just to increase voting registration and the incidence of voting in the areas that we serve, but also to have the co-op's point of view and perspective reflected in those decisions to be part of the political process. You could have somebody who's really engaged and always votes, always knows the issues, but kind of capturing the moment with that voter to say, what's happening with the co-op is part of the reason why you're going to the polls when you vote and express what's going on in your community and what you want to see happen in our political process as a result. Pairing those two things together is really valuable because elections are about ideas, and we want to make sure that those ideas come from us.
And the other factor that NRECA has been active is in your PAC. Your Acre PAC, which you've had some really good success with connecting actual meter members with more political activity, more direct political activity, and so direct that they're willing to give some money to further the cause of cooperative interests.
Keith, any other parts of the 2019 survey that you did that stick out? Not necessarily just in terms of voting, but other things that call out the co-op member as unique?
I would talk about our questions about the economy, because if you read any national news media or watch national news, you get a story about rural America that seems relatively depressing. Things are falling apart, either in healthcare or the economy or, everything, the ag industry, everything. However, when we asked co-op members themselves what was going on in their community, they were really positive, over 80% positive about the economy. And then we further had questions where we asked them where they would rank their co-op and where they would rank things the co-op brings them in terms of their satisfaction with where they live and their economy. And the electric co-ops rank among the top. Very much at the top, much higher than some other institutions that you might think rank higher. So people are happy. happier than I think a lot of folks on the coast think they are in the urban areas. And they're also connecting their electric co-op with progress and positive feeling about what's going on in their community.
Why do you think there is that disconnect between the narrative about rural America and the on-the-ground kind of bona fides that you heard?
Well, of course, I have to go out and ask more people, so I'm just sort of speculating here, but that never stops anybody in Washington. I believe that there's a great resiliency in co-op world in rural America. I believe that people that live there, well, we know they've lived there for a long time. They are very comfortable with their lives. They know that they're living there for a choice, for a high quality of life, and they appreciate that quality of life. And when they have things like reliable electricity, when they have things like affordable electricity, they really appreciate it. And when they know there's things they don't have, they know who to blame and they know that they want it. And they know that when the co-op provides reliable electricity, it helps economic development, that it can bring more jobs, it can bring better jobs, it can bring retail. I think there's a certain satisfaction with living in rural America, and we know from our own poll, they feel like they're not missing out. They're not missing out on shopping opportunities in rural co-op America. They're not missing out on jobs, and they're certainly not missing out on a good economy or certainly a high quality of life, clean air and clean water.
And I'd go one step further than that, Keith. It's also about the idea that you can be involved. You can take a sense of ownership and responsibility for quality of life in your community in a rural place that it just doesn't connect or feel the same in an urban area necessarily. And you're talking about people who volunteer for 3 or 4 different organizations and give their time to their neighbors. And there is a real strong sense of, we built this, we do this ourselves, and we're responsible for making sure it's there for the next generation.
Right. Sense of community. Very strong.
So Keith, knowing what you know about the co-op voter from your survey, are you able to say whether you think the rural voter, kind of extrapolate out whether the rural voter is going to have the same kind of impact they had in 2016 in this upcoming election?
Well, we did not ask partisan questions or electoral questions. So again, just speculating, but I see no reason why the numbers of voters from where Co-op America comes from, why they won't be as strong or stronger than they were in 16. And from other work that I do, I would think that their voting patterns are going to be pretty similar. And in an election that may come down to a few thousand votes, who knows? Could come down to a few million, could come down to a few thousand. I think that those rural voters, those co-op voters are going to make a big impact, a big difference, yes.
Jeffrey, let's kind of wrap it up with going back to co-op's vote, going back to the effort to engage members. Talk a little bit more about why it's important kind of as a co-op to engage at this level. I mean, it's important for our democracy kind of writ large, but why in these communities where co-ops serve is it important for them to engage?
I think it creates a conversation. And with your elected leadership, if you have that conversation and you know that the people in that community or that county are going to turn out and vote, regardless of who they're going to vote for, if you know they're active and engaged in the political process, then elected officials are going to come and make sure that they understand that community, know what drives it, know what its needs are, understand its challenges, and trumpet its successes. So it's really about having a strong and positive conversation through that lens as we can, knowing that all along there's recognition that we're going to show up, not just on election day, but all year round to represent the communities that we serve to.
That's great.
No, I agree. It's all about engagement and connection. You know, and one thing we clearly know is that folks who live in the real parts of America do not really trust or like Washington, D.C. very much. So any institutions that bridge that gap and make that connection are very, very important right now.
All right. Keith, Jeffrey, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks as well to you, our listeners. For more on this and other podcasts, visit electric.coop. Until next time, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Steve Horrell from Deaf Smith Electric Co-op in Hereford, Texas. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.